When was the last time comparing yourself to someone else actually made you feel good, not for the length of one satisfied breath, but in a way that lasted past the moment itself? It is 11 at night and you are looking at a screen. Someone from your graduating class just closed on a house. Someone you follow but have never met is somewhere with better weather than yours, standing in front of something you have not seen in person. You did not go looking for any of this. It arrived mixed in with everything else, and now you are running an inventory you never agreed to run, measuring a life you cannot fully see against a life finished, still in progress. This feeling has a name, and the name is older than the feeling seems to deserve. Not envy exactly, though envy sits close by. Something more structural. A reflex that fires whether you want it to or not, the moment information about somebody else's standing becomes available to you. This channel has mentioned a name once already, in passing, in an earlier video about what does and does not belong to you. It is worth returning to properly, because in 1954, in a journal called Human Relations, the psychologist Leon Festinger published a paper he titled, simply, A Theory of Social Comparison Processes. His starting claim was plain. People have a persistent drive to evaluate their own opinions and abilities, and when no objective yardstick is available, and one usually is not, they do it by looking sideways at other people. Festinger did not stop at the general claim. Two of his specific hypotheses explain most of how the reflex actually behaves. One holds that the tendency to compare yourself to another person decreases as the gap between your abilities grows more divergent. In plain terms, you do not spend real energy measuring yourself against someone wildly out of your range in either direction. The comparison that actually keeps you up at night is the one just next to you, the classmate, the colleague, the friend of a friend whose life resembles yours closely enough to feel genuinely measurable. The other hypothesis is sharper still. In matters of ability, Festinger described what he called a unidirectional drive upward. Translated out of the language of a 1954 paper, when the thing being measured is something you can actually get better at, status, achievement, visible success, the drive only runs one direction. Almost nobody wakes up hoping to compare favorably against someone doing worse. The climb only goes up, and it was built with no top step. None of this is arbitrary cruelty wired into the species for no reason. For most of human history, a person lived and died among a few dozen or a few hundred other people, largely the same faces for an entire lifetime. Knowing exactly where you stood among them, who to cooperate with, who outranked you, who you could safely outdo, was not vanity. It was survival information, and a mind that tracked it closely likely fared better than a mind that did not bother. The reflex is not a design flaw. It is an old tool, built for a small, slow-moving world, now running constantly inside an environment that supplies it with strangers by the thousand. Festinger wrote decades before anyone could open an application and see several hundred people's best days. But the mechanism he described did not need a screen to operate. The screen only supplied it with more material, more often, at a scale nothing in 1954 could have produced. In 2013, in the journal PLOS-ONE, a research team led by the psychologist Ethan Kross ran a study built to catch something a survey usually misses, not what people say about their well-being in general, but what they are actually feeling in the middle of an ordinary week. Retrospective surveys ask people to summarize filtered through memory and whatever mood happens to be present at the moment of answering. This study tried something more direct. Over 14 days, 82 young adults agreed to be texted 5 times a day, at random hours, each message linking to a short survey about their mood and how much Facebook they had used since the last check-in, catching the feeling closer to where it actually happened, before memory had much chance to smooth it over. The pattern held across the full 2 weeks. The more a person had used Facebook at one point in the day, messaged. The more someone used the platform across the whole stretch, the more their overall life satisfaction had declined by the end of it. Direct interaction, face-to-face or by phone, showed the opposite pattern on its own, predicting better mood over time, not worse. Then the researchers found something less expected. Facebook's negative effect was not softer for people who also had plenty of direct contact with others that same day. It was stronger. Their own tentative explanation pointed at comparison. If harmful social comparisons are the actual mechanism, They wrote, then being more socially engaged in general might not blunt a comparison seen on a screen. It might make the comparison land harder when it arrives. None of this is a diagnosis, and it is not an argument for deleting anything. If what follows an evening of scrolling is a passing flatness, that is one thing. If it has become a heavier, more persistent weight that is worth raising with an actual professional, not something a video can resolve on its own. What is worth sitting with is how old the underlying mechanism actually is. More than 2,000 years before Festinger had a journal to publish in, a philosopher named Epicurus built an entire practical philosophy, and an entire community to go with it, around the claim that most human unhappiness comes from measuring a life against a scale that was never going to hold still. Epicurus divided desire into 3 kinds, and the distinction does more work than it looks like at first. Some desires, he said, are natural and necessary. Some are natural, but not necessary. And some, in the translation of the classical scholar C. de Jong, are neither natural nor necessary, but owe their existence to vain opinions. Wanting water when you are thirsty sits in the first category. Wanting a somewhat better meal than you strictly need sits in the second. The third category is the one that matters here, wants that exist only because something outside you, a comparison, a status marker, a number on a screen, told you that you should have them. He was specific about what that third category does to a person, and the sentence still reads like a warning label. The riches of nature, he wrote, are defined and easily procurable, but vain desires are insatiable. Natural wants come with a stopping point built in. Water, food, rest, shelter. You can actually reach enough of each of these and feel the reaching land. A want built entirely out of comparison to somebody else has no flaw beneath it, because the target was never a fixed quantity. It is wherever the next person happens to be standing, and the next person keeps moving. He went further, and named the specific version of this trap that looks, from the outside, like ambition rather than anxiety. Some men, he wrote, have wished to be eminent and powerful, thinking that so they would secure safety as far as men are concerned. His conclusion was not gentle. If that eminence genuinely delivered safety, then the strategy had worked. But if it did not, and Epicurus clearly suspected it usually did not, then the person had failed to obtain the very thing the whole exhausting climb was supposedly for. Status pursued as a comparison game frequently fails at the one job it was hired to do. On the specific feeling this generates when the comparison runs the other way, when someone else appears to be winning a game you never agreed to enter, Epicurus left one of his sharper lines, preserved among what are now called the Vatican sayings, in Peter St. Andre's translation. Envy no one, he wrote. For good people do not deserve envy, and the more that wicked people succeed, the more they ruin things for themselves. It is a strange comfort, precisely because it refuses to pretend the other person's apparent success is fake. It simply insists that the feeling you are having about it was never a reliable instrument for anything. Put Festinger's hypotheses next to Epicurus's doctrines, and something lines up that neither man had access to when he wrote his half of it. One found the mechanism, a drive to compare that reliably points upward and intensifies the closer the target sits to your own life. The other found the honest diagnosis, that the specific currency being measured, eminence, a comparison one against a rotating cast of other people, was manufactured to have no ceiling in the first place. Neither man is describing a character flaw. Both are describing a piece of machinery, evolutionary in one account and ancient in the other, running exactly as it was built to run. None of this produces an instruction to simply stop comparing, which is roughly as useful as telling someone to stop noticing color. What it offers instead is a different question to ask before the reflex runs its course uninterrupted. Not how do I rank against this, but is the thing being measured here even the kind of thing that has a natural flaw? Enough sleep has a flaw. Enough food has a flaw. A number attached to somebody else's version of a good life, glimpsed at a random hour on a random night, has none, and was never going to. The reflex will still fire regardless. The only thing that actually changes is what you do in the half second after it does. The house someone else bought, the better weather in someone else's photograph, none of it was ever really information about your own life. It only felt that way because the reflex does not distinguish between a genuine rival for scarce resources and a stranger's vacation photograph arriving at 11 at night. It fires either way, exactly as it was built to. An earlier video on this channel spent its attention on a Stoic line about reputation living entirely inside other people's heads, a room you have no access to and no real business trying to redecorate. This is the companion problem, and it runs on the same wiring, a drive to check your position against somebody else's, upward, without a flaw, without a finish line, whether the other person ever learns you are running the comparison at all. If there is a specific comparison that keeps returning for you, the kind that shows up at 11 at night uninvited, the comments are open for it. The next video turns to the busiest man in the ancient Roman world, an emperor with more power than almost anyone alive in his century, who solved a very different version of the same problem by writing every evening to an audience of exactly one person, himself.